Welcome to another episode of Peers Over Beers, your favorite digital and social evangelist podcast with your industry veteran hosts, Chris Detzel. This podcast starts now.
All right, welcome to another Peers Over Beers. I'm Chris Detzel, and
I'm Nicole Saunders.
Nicole, how are you?
I'm doing all right. I just got back from a business trip, so I'm a little travel weary, but it was a good trip. Lots of connecting, so that's great.
Connecting is always good and something that we do pretty well, in my opinion. And I heard that you just told me that you waved at me in the DFW airport. So
I did.
I said hello, but it's kind of a joke. But Nicole, we have a special guest and someone I'm super excited about today, and his name is Jono Bacon. Jono, how are you?
Pretty good, thank you. It's great to be here.
Well, it's great to have you. We're certainly excited. And if people don't know who you are, you've been doing community things, consulting, and you've built communities and you've worked for community companies, but you've also authored like 5 books around, I think, all things community. And one of them is, you've had, from my understanding, 2 best-selling books, or really that have won some awards, People Powered and The Art of Community. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah, nailed it.
I'm pretty sure I have them both on my bookshelf right here with my community book collection. So this is thrilling to have you.
Thank you.
We're excited. I'm having my coffee, and Jono, it's early for you, and Nicole, I think it's the same time for you. So we're all having our coffee. I don't see coffee on Jono's thing,
I've already
beers.
slammed it down like half an hour ago.
He's
like
past that.
Yeah, I didn't even taste it. It went in so quickly.
That's generally how that works. And then I'm just like, oh, okay, let's go.
Right.
Well, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, Jono, before I go into the topic today and we start asking you a bunch of questions around it. How about that?
Yeah. So I it's great to be here. I'm just super passionate about communities like we all are. I started out down this pathway when I was 18, and my brother introduced me to Linux, which was an operating system that was just kind of starting to form. Nobody really heard of it, and I got in, I discovered this open source community, and I was just captivated by the idea of people all over the world building software together on the internet. Because back then, when I was growing up in England, the internet was not really, it was like in America, it was, you had like free local calls, so you could get on the internet quickly and easily. In England, you had to pay to get on the internet, so it was like a luxury for a lot of us. And I had no idea that people did this. People got together and they collaborated and they built things together, and it just literally was like a light bulb that went off. And I just wanted to learn everything about it. And then I went on and led community at Canonical, where we built the Ubuntu community, which was about 60 million users. We had about 300,000 active contributors who would be, writing software, providing support. We had hundreds of local user groups. And then I went to X Prize, which has these huge incentive competitions. The first X Prize I worked on was called the Global Learning X Prize, which was a $15 million competition. It was primarily funded by Elon Musk back then.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And
I didn't know he was around back then. That's great.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. In fact, my first week at X Prize was coordinating for him to do writing a script for him to do our kickoff video.
Wow.
And then he ended up pulling out because he was just starting to get famous. And he was like, I can't take any more, any press. Like, he was kind of getting a little weird, kind of the opposite of how he is right now, where he just thrives on controversy. Like, he didn't want any of it back then. And that was a prize that challenged teams to build an Android app that teaches kids how to read within 18 months without a teacher. And then I went to GitHub, and when I was at GitHub, I realized I don't want to work for a big company. GitHub was about 600-700 people. Yeah. And I'd been consulting since 2008 when I put the Art of Community out. So I went full-time consulting in 2015, I think it was. And then I was literally doing that pretty much until the beginning of this year, when I basically fired all my clients apart from one of them. And I launched something called the Community Leadership Core, which is an accelerator that companies who've invested in building a community can join, and will just help you to regularly deliver quarterly community engagement and growth. It's training, coaching. It's a big amalgamation of things. So,
I didn't know that. I thought you were still consulting. So that's really cool.
It's been a journey.
Sounds like
I,
it. Well, it sounds like you've got like seen a lot though. You've had a lot of great, really different experiences. You probably have a pretty broad perspective on the community industry. You've seen what works across different fields and different kinds of things like that.
yeah, I feel very fortunate. I mean, I've had an opportunity to work with a lot of different companies, and I've learned a lot. And what's interesting is there's been like multiple career moments where I've realized how wrong I was. Like, for example, when I left Canonical in 2014, I think it was. So yeah, I've been consulting less than 8 years. I thought I'd figured out how to build online communities, because like building Ubuntu was one heck of an experience. And I put the community out, and my ego kind of took over and said, you figured this stuff out. And when I think about what I've learned since then, I had no idea what I was doing. I hadn't even scratched the surface. So there's always
amazing
lots
what
to learn.
hindsight will show you, isn't it?
Right, exactly.
And I think that, in my experience, just going from, 3 or so different companies and building online communities, I've learned so much from each company, but also each community, right? And I look back when I first did it, I was like, oh my God,
Yeah.
And even the second time I did it, I was like, well, I did pretty good, but wow, I still had a lot to learn from, kind of business outcomes and, pushing data directly into, or not data, but, just how do I kind of look at different areas of the business and how does it affect that and how do I prove some of that out? But a couple of things that we wanted to talk to you about today, though, is something I'm very excited about is kind of the trends. So something that we've heard about, and we don't have to focus solely on this, but is AI, ML, and how that's changing the world, really. And, I can kind of see it, community probably changing in a lot of different ways. And I'll give you this little tidbit that I was at Forrester Research last week before, I don't remember. And the CEO, George Colony, said this. So, and it's interesting because to go back, I used to work at Forrester Research, and I always had respect for George Colony, especially because I felt like he could almost predict the future. It was weird. As he saw it coming, then he can kind of then predict it out. So, for example, on like iPhones and things like that, when it first came out, they just started coming out with apps, right? And then you're like, okay, what is these app things? Really didn't know. But what he said was, businesses and phones and iPads, computer laptops, the ecosystem is changing. You're going to have this app ecosystem to where everybody uses apps, and people will be building these apps to really drive, the business forward. So he said all these things, and I was like, oh wow, that's pretty cool. And I didn't really think about it until like 5 years later, and everything was using apps, and there's a whole ecosystem around apps. And I was like, he was right. It's crazy. So last week he said something like this. He said, the internet today, as we know it, is going to change in a big way. So, for example, he gave a banking. He goes, today, you go on to Google and you search, and it's kind of messy. You just can't find any, you can find things, but it's very difficult to find exactly what you're looking for. But he goes, the way that websites are, it changes the way everything is. And so he gave an example of a banking, and it was very simple. And he goes, so you go to a bank, and now, the way I see it in the future is it's like a chatbot kind of thing. You ask for your account information. How much money do I have in my account? You have $100. And what has been the last activity in the last month? It's been this, and this. And it starts giving you that information. So when you do searches, it starts being more specific to your needs. And so I kind of think about community and how that changes. Just wanted to look, it was just a fun little thing. And I thought, okay, to some degree, he's probably right, and probably not completely. But just wanted to get your thoughts and what are you seeing? What do you kind of believe is going to happen?
I think we're at the beginning of a really monumental shift. And I think it can be broken into a few different pieces. AI is fascinating to me because, over the years, we've seen a whole bunch of technological trends, right? I mean, there's AI now, but we had, blockchain, crypto, there's been cloud, mobile devices, all kinds of different pieces. And at the beginning of every technological shift, there's a hype cycle kicks off. And being British, we tend to be a cynical people.
Yeah.
Especially being a British person living in the Bay Area in California. Like I'm surrounded by, you know, chirpy Californians with very, very white teeth who get excited about frickin' everything. Like the word awesome is just overused where I live. So, you know, these conversations will kick off about these technological trends. And it was, for me, it felt relatively straightforward to see through the hype cycle where it was kind of going to get to. Like the classic example is Web3. Like everybody was banging on and on about Web3. And it was evident that this was not going to have a tremendous shift, especially NFTs, which is stupid in concept.
Completely
beyond
agree.
Beyond like fundamental infrastructure changes like blockchain, right? Which was always going to be very successful. Like Walmart using it to track, like, you know, meat shipments and stuff like that were evident how it would be used. What I find fascinating about AI is I don't know where the hype cycle starts and ends because it is so monumental in what it can do. I remember actually the first time I used ChatGPT, my wife and I were going out to dinner at a swanky restaurant called Single Thread in Healdsburg, and we were all excited.
Fancy dinner date, first place, like best place for AI.
Right. Well,
sure she loved it.
We were out. Part of the reason why I remember this is we were out with like two couples who'd flown out from New York to go to this restaurant, like because we're all into food, and we're all talking about AI. And I think I was the last one to the game to try it out, and they were like, "Oh man, you should check it out. It's crazy."
Because you're British.
Right. And
Got it.
and it was the first time where I was genuinely a little bit scared about technology, just how good it was. So I think the shift with AI is going to come in a few different forms. One is going to be using it to help human beings to create outcomes, whether it's going to be creating content, whether it's going to be actually using it to generate strategic direction and guidance. Like one of the things that's fascinating about ChatGPT is you can tell it, you know, you are a business advisor, you are a therapist, respond in that role. And it's actually not bad in how it does it. And it's only going to get better. But I think where it's also going to be particularly helpful is going to be identifying trends and patterns in huge data sets. Like you can do it today. Like you can upload a CSV file with a mound of Slack data, and it will tell you what the trends were in that data. It's going to put tools like Common Room and Orbit and Crowd.dev and like that in a tricky spot, because that's a big chunk of the value proposition there, and AI is going to have to kind of fuel that. So I think it's going to be a great helper. You know, I think right now some people are misusing it and they're using it to generate content, and a lot of the content that it generates is kind of garbage unless you feed it the right kind of material.
That's
right. To me, AI is one piece. What's really interesting is the large language models. It's like, how do you build your second brain? That to me is where I think it's going to get especially interesting. And it's going to be it's going to put a lot of people out of work as well. But also I think it's going to be a tool that people will harness and make the work more efficient. I don't want community managers creating content. Like I don't want someone sitting there spending 2 hours on a blog post. That's not the best use of your time and your talents and your expertise. I want community managers engaging and interacting and being human with another human being. So if ChatGPT can make it easier to create content, great. So then you can spend more time engaging and interacting and having conversations like we're having today.
So I love that you brought that up, because I've been thinking a lot, you know, the community I work with is a product community. It was founded within the support organization. So a lot of the focus is the product Q&A. And of course, if AI is coming in and powering chatbots that are answering a lot of questions and helping to generate content and populate knowledge base articles that are answering a lot of those questions, it starts to raise that other question of, well, what is the community for, right? If most of the answers to product support questions have been documented, I think it's where it really puts some onus on us as community managers to make sure that our communities have value beyond tactical Q&A, right? And things that robots can do. And I do think that ultimately it will make communities that much more valuable, because it will be the place that you can go to connect with real humans and get the kinds of answers that a ChatGPT just can't give you, because it doesn't have experiences, right? It can't give you its own perspective on things. But I know that we're thinking about that a lot with our community, and we're actually working on a big pivot to start to encompass some broader CX related conversations and things that move away just from the tactical Q&A, because that's going to get covered. But I do think a lot of community managers are probably nervous because, the AI could come in and cover a lot of the things that we're doing. And then we have to really be thoughtful about, okay, well, now what is my role? And now what is the community's role?
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, look, I would say I try to be as no bullshit as possible in my life. If you are a community manager and you're primarily answering questions for your community members, your job is going to go away.
That's right.
It's time to pivot. It is going to go away. There's no doubt about it. You're going to be replaced by a chatbot. But to me, what's really exciting about this is I'm generally of a view of there is manageable and non-manageable adversity in the world, right? So when I think of like non-manageable adversity, it's things like misogyny and racism and transphobia and all those things that are out of your control. Like if you're a person of color, you can't control that element of who you are. And if people are racist, then that's the reason why they're being racist. It's not a thing that you can change. Then I think there's manageable adversity, which are the things that we can react to and we can change. And I actually think that AI is going to create a level of manageable adversity that is going to make community management harder, but I think it's going to make it more meaningful. Because right now, honestly, like when I see a lot, like the amount of Discord channels that you see, and it's just all Q&A. And I just think to myself, like, why would anyone go back to that community? Like, it's transactional. You go in there, you ask a question, you get a response, and then you peace out. And to me, like, the greatest communities are where it's where you build relationships and you mentor and people support each other and guide each other. And we tap into the human condition. We talk about our experiences as kids that formed our adult perspectives and things like that. AI can't do that. Because AI can give you information, but it can't give you experience. And to me, like, people don't pay for information, but people do pay for experience. So to me, it's actually going to force our industry, I think, into a more meaningful direction. But it will, I think, a lot of people who've just landed in kind of the support community world, I think, are going to struggle. And people who work in support, like especially like lower level support, like frontline support, I think a lot of those folks should start thinking about something else to do.
Well, I've had a couple great conversations,
especially
on the
with Nicole here. Sorry.
No worries. I've had a couple of great conversations on the Conversations with Zendesk podcast with folks that are thinking about the ways that AI can help make jobs better, right? Like some people are going to be left behind. But for some people, it's going to get rid of the mundane parts of their job and free them up to lean into other things. And my pitch to a lot of business owners is like, maybe don't just think about how this is going to eliminate headcount. Also think about how it can make those jobs more meaningful, or how you can better leverage the workforce you have to drive greater value, because now they're freed up and you can drive, even with support agent, put them on the more complex cases, give them more specialized training that can take those things that the bots can't handle, or, where you've got to do those handoffs and escalations. But of course, I understand businesses are always going to get cost savings, and that's a thing. But a great quote from one of my leadership this week was, she said, AI is not going to put us out of work. People who know how to use AI are the things that are going to put people out of work. And so I think it does behoove everyone to start learning and experimenting now, because if you don't know how to do it, you are going to get left behind.
I totally agree with you, Nicole, on this one. I think what's interesting about this is that, I think with each of these, technology revolutions, you always have that conversation around, oh, it's going to put people out of work, right? This is a sweeping statement, and I'm sure people will be able to pick it apart in different ways. But as a general rule, I think the work that it puts people out of is shitty work that no one wants to do. Like, I think a lot of people, like, the classic example is robots in like Amazon fulfillment centers. Does anyone really, really want to do that work? Of course they don't. They want to do something that's different. It's going to be much more kind of stimulating in different ways. It doesn't necessarily have to be IT stuff, but I would argue that the average Amazon fulfillment worker would much rather be doing something else than lifting boxes from one place to another. But the tricky thing here, where I think it gets complicated, is it creates a greater pressure on the digital divide, right? If you grew up in a household with access to information and a culture of mentoring and growth, then you're going to be fine. But if you grew up, like I grew up, for example, in, what in England we call council housing, which is basically like working class government housing. And we didn't have any money when I was a kid. And but I'm very fortunate because my parents have always just been like intellectually curious and created a thriving environment about like always pushing yourself and growing and all the rest of it. So I feel very fortunate about that. But a lot of people don't have that in their lives. And I worry about those folks being left behind, where for us, there's a natural intuition. Oh, well, we'll go online, I'll watch some YouTube videos, I'll learn about this. And I can see a path forward to getting one of those newer jobs. So I think it does create a greater requirement for us to improve access to education. The good news is that the internet makes this easier than ever before, right? But like then we get to first principles, going back and back and back. Like this is one of the reasons why I'm really happy that Elon Musk has been working on Starlink, because you can't have access to all that information and mentoring and growth if you don't have access to the internet. And if you're living in the middle of nowhere and you're on a dial-up connection, like so many people are, then you're just not in the game, right? You haven't even got an opportunity to get started at that point. So
yeah. Well, we do need those entry-level jobs, right? I mean, let's think about this. Support agent roles are often the entry point in a lot of companies. And if those are the jobs that are getting disrupted, where do you start? What does become the new entry point into a lot of those things?
I have a suspicion that what will happen is there'll always be the hierarchy of roles. Like you'll always have like the CEO at the top, but the nature of an entry level job will probably change. Like I think, and I'm not an expert in this, so I'm kind of talking out of my backside when I'm saying this. So take it with a pinch of salt. But like I think if you look back at like the 80s, for a lot of businesses, entry level was someone who worked in the mailroom. And it was largely the equivalent of an Amazon fulfillment worker. Like it's a manual job moving one thing to another thing because there's not a machine that could do that. Whereas now, when I think of most businesses and you look at more of an entry level job, it tends to be like someone who's working a front desk or an office manager, something along those lines, or maybe someone who's people are interning. And those jobs, I think, are probably a lot more fulfilling than the mailroom job. So I think that there'll always be those entry level jobs, but they will shift and they will require a greater level of kind of dexterity in using technology. So,
something that you mentioned before, and either one of you can kind of react to my thinking around here, obviously, but is that, some of those entry level, or not just the entry levels, but when you think about community management in specific and these support communities that, I have, and of course, Nicole runs and things like that, kind of the goal, and I think this is kind of where this changes of a support community. One of the goals is kind of this case deflection to where you have so many support agents that, just can't get to all these basic questions. And so you're trying to now get your own customers, your employees, whether they're support or PMs or whoever from a product community, to answer those questions, or even partners in our case. And so, does some of that go away? Yeah, I think I can see some of that go away. But I think as a community leader, you got to think of other ways, like you said, and I think of, these people that are using your product on a daily basis, and now they can get these answers that are more technical in nature because, hey, we fed this chat GPT like thing, with all of our data and everything else, and knows all the answers and most of the answers. But the things that community leaders, I think, can do is think about, how do you make your customer successful? So we know of a lot of programs that can help. So we still want to be there to help you answer those questions that you have about the product. But some people want to be thought leaders in the space. They want to talk about what they do on a daily basis. So how do we start thinking about communities like that, right? So, hey, if we had a podcast on our community, right, that, like Nicole does, right? Like on you're starting to talk to your customers about what they do on a daily basis, and now they're out there because of your brand, right? And so your brand kind of stuff has that. Obviously, I don't think user groups go away. Like I think some of those
Right.
still stay around. I think those programs, are really going to be helpful. Look, I've never been a huge kind of fan of, I look at Discord and I'm on it every now and then. I'm like, I don't really get this. How do companies get business outcomes out of these communities that are just kind of walled in, and how do they connect to other business units and other things? And what do they get? It's a place to
Right.
connect, I guess. And it's just, but it's very confusing to me. So, I mean, the point is like, I think there are jobs, just it's another level, right? Like we really have to think about how we engage our users in different ways, whether it's getting those folks kind of thinking about thought leadership, or telling their stories on a consistent basis. And then there could be, what I think about is, and the only word I can think about is kind of these thought leadership type Q&As, or not necessarily Q&As, but forums, if forums are still around, which I always think you think forums have been around forever, chat groups. So I don't know that they ever go away, right? So there's always going to be some form of, I think, forums. You know what I mean? Like I don't know that they go away.
I agree, and I think what will happen is that AI will help to fuel. This is where it excites me, is that I think AI will help to fuel the ability for people to scale out personal relationships.
Yeah,
I'll give you an example. When I was at Canonical and we were building Ubuntu, we faced, and this is a good problem to have, like there was so much activity in our community that one thing that we really stressed about and wrestled with was delivering a personal experience. Like we'd kick off a campaign and we'd have thousands of people who would join it. So to deal with that many people, we had to create systems and workflows that were by definition impersonal. Like, oh, if you want to engage with something, you have to go and fill in a form. If you're a community of 30 people, you can just have a conversation with each of those 30 people. And dealing with like scale while balancing that personal relationship was something that was really hard. And there were some people in the Ubuntu community who quite rightfully felt like they had a bad experience, because they were like, well, I joined this community and everything seems so engaging, but then I had to fill in 10 forms to go and participate in something. And that sucks. Now I'll counter that with, and this is where I think it gets into your world, Nicole, like with Zendesk and companies that really kind of fuel like amazing customer experiences. There's a company called Attio, and they're building a CRM. They're a fairly early stage company. And I absolutely love their product. Attio is awesome. It's like, it's the first non-crappy CRM that I've ever used personally. It's kind of like Airtable-ish in many ways. Huh. And there's this woman who works at Attio called Cassandra, and they've got like the little chat widget thing, the little kind of chat widget thing. I think they use Intercom, and they so you got a question about something, you go and type it in, and you get a response, and they do the usual thing of like sharing like pre-built documentation, and then you can talk to a human being if you want to. But because they're early stage, what I've been doing is I've been finding all kinds of little things that I'd recommend fixes for, right? Either product feature requests or tiny little issues for them to resolve, and I've been submitting them. Now, what Cassandra's done is that when she and their CEO Nick told me this, that when they have a feature request, they log it in their system, but they also log who submitted that feature request, which user. So at times, Cassandra will randomly reach out to me and say, hey, Jono, hope you're doing well. And she'll say like personal things like, how are things out in California? And then she'll say, by the way, the engineering team have we're about to release this update, and it's going to include this feature that you requested. And I've told so many people about this personal experience. Now, I don't know Cassandra.
Solving that problem is really an opportunity there.
Yeah. Exactly, and I imagine, and I don't want to speak for you, Nicole, but I imagine that this is like the historic view of Zendesk was it's ticketing, right, and then knowledge base and things like that. But I'm guessing that more and more companies like Zendesk are going to be creating all of these easier ways to like surface these, like when I interact with a customer, that I can understand more about their world and what they did and how that feeds into the broader experience. That to me is going to be super exciting, where I think it's going to revolutionize customer support, especially. And I think it'll bridge customer support and community management, because there will be some people who just They want their question answering, and they are not interested in hanging out with other people like
right.
them who use the products, right? And I
Totally.
think that's okay.
Well, and
okay.
that's, you know, one, I love that you mentioned that, because like people don't come to product communities to make friends, right? Like they're not there to like hang out and nerd out about software. At least most of them aren't. There's probably like 3 or 4 people in any given product community that are those people.
Yeah.
But you know, it's part of where you talk about like expanding these things to like, how is your community helping people be better at their jobs, right? And learn more about their field and their industry, not just your particular tool within it. And I think that's where there's the value. But Jono, I really love that you brought up product feedback, because this is where I think AI actually has the most potential for community managers, because you are right. It is a problem at darn near every company, every community manager I've talked to. Product feedback is this huge issue where you're just getting this mass of feedback, solicited or unsolicited, from
Big
your
black
users.
hole.
Yeah, it comes
No matter
in.
what technology you use, it stinks.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
And like all that feedback comes in just like whenever people have an idea. So it's not necessarily when you're like planning your roadmap, but they want a response
exactly.
right away. They want to know, hey, I just gave you an idea. Are you thinking about it? Are you going to do something with it? And it is very hard to take that mass of feedback, and whether it's coming in your community or through your voice of customer team or through surveys or through meetings that your success teams and your AEs are having. And usually it's coming in through all of those channels, mostly written down in like meeting notes or community posts, you know, not very measurable things.
Yeah.
But now you can take all of that and feed it into an AI and say, tell me the 5 most frequently mentioned things, or tell me
Exactly
what are these summaries. And like, I think the AI is going to be such a powerful tool for companies to start to actually use their customer feedback and aggregate for that zeitgeist in a way that is meaningful and usable by product teams in a way that we've never been able to before. And that is so cool, what you were just sharing about how, was it Cassandra?
Yeah.
Had figured out how to actually go follow up with individuals. Because I do that with some members of my community, the ones that are like really well-known friendlies. I know what's important to them. I can ping them and say, hey, we're working on, you know, the Salesforce integration or whatever. And it's so exciting to them. It is so meaningful when we come back and say, we listened to your idea and we're actually thinking about it.
It means the world.
But to be able to do that at scale, it's going to require AI to help you. But how exciting, right? What if we could all suddenly like bubble up these insights and communicate, close that loop back to customers really easily? Maybe we can use that to actually get the right information to the right product managers internally. I mean, there's so many things that I think AI will really help with, and we shouldn't just be scared of it or worried about how it's going to interrupt our jobs or corrupt the information that's in our forums, you know?
Yeah, I think it's going to make things, I think it could make things so much better. I was just going to say real quick, I don't want to cut you off, Chris, because I know
you're good. You're good.
You can cut him off. It's fine.
I think there's companies who without AI have managed the influx of product feedback effectively, but it requires like almost like data science levels of strategic, structured thinking. Like, for example, a friend of mine is this guy called Rahul Vohra. He's the CEO of Superhuman. And they I think it was him actually designed this thing called the product market fit engine. And it's basically a methodology. You can go and search for it online, and there's a great write-up on Coder, and there's one on First Round Capital, of basically how they'd survey their customers, and they'd kind of break them down into like, one of the questions they'd ask was, how disappointed would you be if our product went away? And you could say like very disappointed, somewhat disappointed, or not disappointed at all. And then they'd ask them for like their feedback. And then they'd slice the data. So they'd focus on the people who will be somewhat disappointed, or the people who are, they kind of like what they're doing, but they're not fully bought in. And then if you look at the desired, you know, feature improvements from that group of people, then that helps shape your roadmap, right? So, but Rahul is like a remarkable mind in this kind of stuff, and he can design like a way of doing things like that. And what I love is that with AI, you don't need to have a remarkable mind as much. Like, you can just basically say, here, vacuum up all this information and tell me some insights about it. I think it democratize, the word democratize is way overused, but I'm going to use it here, even though it's 7:45 in the morning. It really does democratize, I think, data for people. Whereas data previously was the domain of, you know, nerds with like thick glasses with a piece of like tape that's holding them together. And you had to be, to talk about data shape and all of this nerdy nonsense. I like the fact that now you'll be able to feed AI a load of information and ask it a human question and actually get some human insights out of it, which will enable those kinds of experiences.
Yeah, absolutely.
Love it.
Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Nicole.
I think it's going to be really interesting to see how this shapes our fields. So the other concern that I've had with AI is the idea of having a big influx of generated content in the community. On the one hand, I think it could be great, especially for like one of the challenges a lot of communities have is how to be global, right? But many of the community managers, we're based in the States. Our community is largely in English. We haven't really been able to expand into other languages very easily. And so it puts the onus on a lot of our non-English speaking or English as a second language speaking customers to have to write things out. And so I do think that the generative AI could be really helpful for them in composing a question or a response and saying, okay, now write this like a native English speaker would write it so that this is clear for folks. But on the other hand, I am really curious to see what happens as far as like, does it become problematic that we have a lot of like bot generated content in the community? Do they start coming up with technologies to help us identify what is genuinely written by an end user and what is bot generated, beyond spam? Also, like, is it problematic or is that okay? Is it all right if a lot of users are using generative AI to compose and respond to each other in a forum? And what does that do to the integrity of the discussion if it's a whole bunch of bot assisted content going back and forth? You can almost see that world in which you get just two bots talking to each other, and like, how does that play out for communities? And that's the one thing where like I haven't seen the silver lining yet. I'm not sure what how we're going to manage that and what that's going to do to forums and things like that.
And I think I see that Jono wants to say something, but quickly,
no, go ahead.
As you kind of think about the traditional way today and past, the way it works, right, is you do a search on Google. Basically, the goal of all of my content, when I think of community content, is to be on the first page of Google when somebody has a question about our product. I want community to be number one on that page, and I want them to find that answer. And when you have a lot of that content that you're talking about, Nicole, that's just all this blah of content, not just for community, but just for all over blogs and whatever, you're just going to get this kind of shitty content that just comes out at times. So the way that I think that's a Google problem, I think that's a search problem, I think that's something that they're going to fix at some point. They look at some point, right? And I don't know that, that the onus is going to be all on us to say, well, is that generated by a bot and is it just not real? Or, you know what I mean? I believe that those kind of, whether it's Google or whoever comes up, look, when you think of like Microsoft, back in the day when they had search or Netscape or Scope or whatever the hell it was called back then, Google kind of completely transformed the search piece. Somebody like Google will transform the new search, whatever that's going to be and what that looks like. And I believe that's the future but that's on some technology to do that. I don't know. I mean, that's just kind of how I'm thinking about it. And it just changes everything in the next 5 to 6 years, maybe less. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really interesting. I'm kind of on the fence with this. I think ultimately what this is going to result in is going to be a massive question of privacy, which I'll get to in a moment. But like, I'm kind of on the fence because I think we already have this problem today. Like, good like growth hackers and digital marketing people, they're already keyword stuffing. They're already using, SERP hacks and stuff like that to get on the front page. And I would say that the quality of a lot of front page Google content is garbage because they're actually not adding great material. They're just keyword stuffing, and they're using SEMrush to track like searches, and then they're packing web pages full of those searches, and they're figuring out how to do it without cannibalizing their search results. So you end up with a load of garbage. And a lot of things like where you ask a legitimate question and it's just an affiliate page, right? It's not an actual page. It's an affiliate page with some kind of offer. I'm generally of the view that if I can do a search and ask a question on Google and AI can generate a much more comprehensive piece of content. Because I don't like with the current pages that we have, like where people game the system, they don't actually want to create great content. They just want to get ranked and they want to show their product, right? I actually think that with AI, you could get onto the front page, you can generate content with those keywords, but you could actually generate better material. And if it solves my problem, if I search for something and I get better material, then I don't really care whether a human being created it or not. But the caveat to that is that's information, it's not experience, right? So if we want to get our own personal experience in there, like for example, like I use ChatGPT to generate content, but I've never used ChatGPT to generate content that I haven't fed it the data.
Exactly.
Right. So I will spend a lot of time like feeding ChatGPT a whole bunch of my views and perspectives and my approach that I've learned from my experience. But then I'll use ChatGPT purely to generate the material, and then I'll go and edit it. And this is where we get to the privacy issue, which is if you want to generate, like if we wanted to generate a blog post that combines Chris and Nicole's perspectives based upon all of your amazing combined experience, by definition, you would need to feed an LLM all of your experience. You need to be able to write that down and get that in there. And that's where it leads to a privacy issue, which is to really generate a piece of content that's truly representative of both your experience. ChatGPT needs to know everything about your opinions and your experience. And then that then leads us to the viewpoint of like, okay, we then literally need to mirror our experience in a digital form.
And you can do that, by the way, by transcripts of stuff like this, feed it. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
I do that
That's
stuff already.
Yeah. And it works at a lightweight way. But then like, I think what's interesting is the conversation about AI becomes now it's less about like, how do we use ChatGPT to generate a piece of content? Then it's like, how do I feed everything in my head into ChatGPT in a way that is makes, and that's a weird world of that. That's why we're getting into like George Orwell territory where like, there's a digital replica of my head. I don't like that.
Well, that stuff's happening. Like you can talk to I could talk to my dead mom if I had her voice on certain things and just feed it, right? And then if I had some stuff there about her, I can now talk to her in her voice and everything else, and it will sound like her. Like they've done that with Steve Jobs and others that have had a lot of different, videos out, and you can just talk to them now. That's the anyways, not to get off, but
that's Black Mirror territory. Yeah,
it's some crazy shit. You know what I mean?
Well, I think the takeaway from this whole conversation for me is how important it's going to be for all of us in the community space to really start thinking about how we can build up the right skill set to leverage these tools in ways that are going to help us and they can really accelerate our communities and the value we can drive for our members and the value we can drive for the businesses that we work for. But make sure that you don't get left behind, because if you're not keeping up, and these technologies are moving fast. I know that I'm just amazed at how quickly this has come on. Jono, you mentioned earlier some of the other evolutions of technology, and I felt like those were things where like you had a few years to kind of adjust and like and this has been like the last couple months, and suddenly these tools are rolled out. They're available, they're getting used right now.
It's pretty cool. And Nicole, you summed it up very well. And I don't know, Jono, if you had some parting words, but before we kind of let you go. Anything?
I mean, so I'll caveat this with the fact that I'm an optimist, and I've pretty much always been an optimist, because I genuinely think that we live in a world where there is just massive amounts of opportunity, and I think everybody's got a seat at the table. Especially now more than ever. Like I think, like I mentioned earlier on when I was talking about manageable and not a non-manageable adversity. I think for many years, fundamental differences in human beings would hold people back. Like being a woman working in an office in the 70s was a way different experience to a woman working in an office today, for example. And I like the fact that we've made those societal shifts, and the access to information that we've got available to us and the opportunities to use that and the tools. I think it's a better time than ever for building communities. Like it's amazing when you think about what you can do with AI and tools like Zapier and community platforms. And now we can put videos on YouTube and you can do podcasts. I think it's amazing, but I think it requires us to be adaptable and to not get ground up by our own biases and not get ground up by our own view of what the limitations of what we can do. I think when we basically say, let's just get out there and have a go and see what we can come up with and always be learning and growing, I think it's the best time to be alive for building communities.
Ah, that was awesome. So, well, thanks everyone for tuning in to another Peers Over Beers. Please rate and review us. My name is Chris Detzel, and
I'm Nicole Saunders. And thank you so much to our special guest today, Jono. It was such a pleasure having you and such a fascinating conversation.
that was awesome.
Likewise. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Take care.
All right.
Thanks.